Aloha, sweet Maui people. Once again, my name is Christina, and I lived on the west side of Maui for 8 years, and I worked out of the harbor there. Living on Maui was the best time in my life, and I want to help by sharing information I learned while recovering from a wildfire in California 2 years ago that destroyed my home, everything I own, and my community. This is part 3 for recovery information. If you have not watched part 1 and part 2, I'll put the links down in the description. I would recommend doing that before you watch this one. Wow. I cannot believe all the videos that are being published to YouTube. I want to take a moment to address the conspiracy theories. But before I do that, I want to stress again the importance of finding housing right away. Last night, the governor announced that he had secured 2,000 dwellings. So find out where they're placing people into these units and go sign up. The help will not come to you. No one's going to try to contact you or call you. You have to go to the centers and get the help. I know the people who live there are very proud and independent, but if you are ever to ask for help, now is the time. Very soon, if they are not set up already, there will be resource centers around the island for victims. The Red Cross is going to be there, and some other government agencies like the DMV. You can get an ID or a driver's license. County agencies will be there to give you a grant deed for your home if you need it, or some other important paperwork. Past tax documents you can apply for. Go to every single resource center they set up because there will be some additional help with each one. You're going to have to accept the fact that you're going to spend the next year or maybe even longer standing in line and filling out forms. Every single spare moment of your time will be spent looking for permanent housing, filling out forms, organizing paperwork, or making phone calls. It's been 2 years since my fire happened, and the propane company just now came to pick up my propane tank. I rented that from them. So after about 6 phone calls over the course of 2 years, that happened. It takes at least four phone calls to make one thing happen. 2 years later, I'm still dealing with everything. Okay, conspiracy theories. Yes, there will be some. We were told that the state wanted to burn down the town of Greenville because they wanted to make Indian Valley a water reservoir. We were told firefighters abandoned Greenville because they were called to go save more expensive homes that were on a nearby lake. We were told all kinds of things. What I do know as the truth is that there was no water when the firefighters arrived to our town. People had been watering their properties to try to keep them wet. They had been watering so heavy that they ran the water table so low there was no water left. We had been on water use restriction before that, so that could have been true. I don't really know for sure. Also, once the water infrastructure is burned, there is just no water. My stepdad tried to fight the campfire with a garden hose. When he turned it on, no water came out, and he was lucky to make it out of there alive. My own theory is that along with climate change and drought, the geoengineering remnants are very flammable. The agencies who control the weather spray contrails from airplanes in the sky, and those contrails spread out and become cloud cover. The particles they spray are primarily aluminum and barium, and eventually those particles fall down to the Earth's surface, and it makes everything 100 times more flammable. It's just one of those truths being dismissed as a conspiracy theory, but there's actually, hard research behind it. So it's just so hard to figure out what the truth actually is these days. So many conflicting theories. I'm posting the link to the documentary called The Dimming, if you're interested in that when you get time. You guys are about 2 weeks out from your fire. So looking back at what was happening for me during this time was this. I had secured a place to live with a friend of mine who had an ohana in her backyard. She said that I could stay there for a year. It was a 200 square foot cabin, very much like Ohana's over there. It had a little bar sink and a stove and an oven with a fridge. It was also furnished, so I had a very soft landing. I could not move in yet, though, because there was another evacuee staying there at that point. My friend said I could come when that person was allowed to go back into her area. So I stayed for a week at another friend's family ranch home that was empty at the time. It was about an hour's drive away from the Ohana. This friend had reached out to me when she heard my house burned down. So by the time my house burned down, we had actually been evacuated for about 3.5 weeks. I had already left the area before we were even evacuated. I was at a nearby lake when all this smoke started pouring in from the west. It was blowing towards me. So I packed up my stuff and drove home through an actual firestorm, screaming and crying the entire time because it looked like I was driving straight into the fire. I had never seen a firestorm at that point, and I didn't even really know there even was such a thing. The sky was blood red, and it was pouring down rain and lightning striking everywhere, like the apocalypse was right overhead. So I finally got home, and I could only find 2 of my cats, so I left with them and drove to my stepsister's about 3 hours away. I was sure at that point that my house had burned down, and that I had lost my other cat. I was really upset. Come to find out later, the fire was still 6 miles away from my home at that time. So at about 9:30 p.m., I drove back to my house to get the other cat. Fire usually lays down at night, and the CHP who was at the turnoff from my town said to hurry up and get back out because a different leg of the fire was also closing in, coming up on the canyon side. So I found the cat, drove all the way back to my sister's, drove all night. My stepdad and his wife were there, house sitting for them. They gave me updates about what they were seeing on the news and how close the fire was to my town. They had already lost everything in the campfire 3 years earlier, so they were the perfect people to be, hunkering down with at that time. One thing we did find out later is there was some political conflicts in fighting our fire between the Forest Service and CAL FIRE. The Forest Service wants to let the fire burn if there are no structures in danger, and CAL FIRE wants to suppress the fire. So there's 2 conflicting agencies there. There was a 60 Minutes episode that covered the whole thing, and I'll leave that in the link in the description. Last thing, you guys, once you get into housing, keep going to the resource centers to stock up on supplies like water, food, gas, clothing, bedding, toiletries, other things you need. 2 years later, I'm still wearing those clothes and using that bedding. It looks like they have a ton of stuff at those centers. They'll have that stuff available probably for about the next 6 months to a year. I was still collecting stuff about 6 months later after the fire. You're ultimately responsible for your own recovery. We had people who recovered, and on the other hand, we had a whole bunch more homeless people after our fires. People are still homeless to this day from the Camp Fire and the Dixie Fire. I'm sure other fires, they're living in their cars or camping. It's a horrible mess over here in California. Anyway, I'm sending you love and aloha, and I hope tomorrow will be a better day. Mwah.